One of the deadliest guns of the Second World War was built by a toy company and cost less than a pair of boots. The British Empire's mightiest fortress, 60 million pounds of concrete and naval guns, surrendered to an army riding stolen bicycles. And in 1993, rockets worth a few $100s apiece knocked America's $6 million helicopters out of the sky and rewrote its foreign policy in a single night. Militaries love to believe the expensive side wins. History keeps disagreeing. These are 5 dirt-cheap weapons that humiliated superpowers. And this time, we are keeping score in money. Stay for the last case, because that weapon is still in service right now, and its cost per kill math should embarrass every defense budget on Earth. Here is the uncomfortable rule of war that no procurement office wants printed. Armies are judged in peacetime by their budgets. Parades, price tags, gleaming prototypes. But combat does not grade on cost. It grades on results, and it hands out no refunds. Every so often, a weapon appears that costs almost nothing, violates every principle of respectable engineering, and defeats equipment worth 1,000 times more. The superpower on the receiving end never sees it coming, precisely because it is too cheap to take seriously. Our first case begins in the winter of 1939, with the strangest arms manufacturer of the 20th century, a liquor company. On November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland with hundreds of thousands of men and thousands of tanks. Finland owned a few dozen obsolete tanks and almost nothing that could stop armor. On paper, the war was already over. Then the Soviet foreign minister, Vyacheslav Molotov, went on the radio and claimed Soviet aircraft were not bombing Finland at all. They were dropping bread to starving workers. The Finns looked up at the cluster bombs falling on their towns and gave them a name, Molotov's bread baskets. And since dinner had been delivered, they decided to serve a drink to go with it. The drink was a glass bottle of gasoline thickened with tar, so the flame would stick to steel and pour out thick black smoke. The manufacturer was Alko, the Finnish state liquor monopoly. At its distillery in Rajamäki, workers who had been bottling schnapps a month earlier bottled roughly 450,000 Molotov cocktails, with storm matches taped to the glass. A national liquor company had become a weapons plant, and its product cost about as much as the drink it replaced. The tactics were as cheap as the weapon. Soviet columns advanced along narrow forest roads, tanks and trucks in one long line, exactly like the doomed division on the Raata Road. Finnish ski troops cut the columns into pockets, stripped the tanks of their infantry, and then closed in on foot. Early Soviet tanks breathed through air intakes on the rear engine deck. One bottle, placed or thrown onto that deck, turned the engine compartment into a furnace and gave the crew a choice: burn inside or climb out into the rifles. By the end of the war, the Finns had knocked out well over 1,000 Soviet tanks, hundreds of them not with cannons, but with men on foot carrying bottles and demolition charges. The world watched a superpower get set on fire by farmers. In December, the League of Nations expelled the Soviet Union outright. Soviet records eventually admitted more than 126,000 dead. Finland was forced to cede territory in the peace that followed. That part is true, but the Red Army's prestige never recovered, and one man in Berlin drew a fatal conclusion from it. If Finland could do this with bottles, his generals told him, Russia would collapse in a summer. The most feared land army in Europe had been humiliated by the national liquor monopoly, and the bill for the weapon was pocket change. And if a bottle can beat a tank, ask Singapore what a bicycle can do to an empire. On December 8th, 1941, the same day as Pearl Harbor, on the other side of the dateline, General Yamashita's 25th Army landed at the top of the Malay Peninsula. 600 miles to the south sat Singapore, the crown fortress of the British Empire, protected by a naval base that had cost 60 million pounds and batteries of 15-inch guns. British planners had spent 20 years assuming 2 things. The jungle was impassable, and any attack must come from the sea. The Japanese answer to 20 years of imperial planning was the bicycle. Each division rolled with around 6,000 of them, and thousands more were simply requisitioned along the way, which was easy because before the war, Japan had exported bicycles to Malaya by the shipload. Every town on the peninsula was an unwitting spare parts depot for the invasion. The British blew more than 200 bridges during the retreat south. It barely mattered. Infantry waded the rivers with bicycles on their shoulders and kept coming, through rubber plantations and jungle tracks no truck could use, covering ground faster than the defenders could dig in. The tropical heat burst the tires, so the soldiers rode on bare steel rims, and at night, the clatter of thousands of rims on asphalt sounded exactly like approaching tanks. Defending units reported armored columns that did not exist and fell back again. 70 days and 600 miles later, the bicycles reached Singapore. You have probably heard that the fortress fell because its great guns pointed the wrong way. That story is false, and the truth is more embarrassing. Most of the guns could traverse inland just fine, but they had been stocked with armor-piercing shells designed to punch through battleships, nearly useless against infantry in the rubber trees. The Empire had bought the wrong ammunition for the war that actually arrived. Yamashita, outnumbered and running low on ammunition himself, bluffed. He demanded unconditional surrender, as if he could take the island at will. On February 15, 1942, around 80,000 British, Australian, and Indian troops surrendered in a single day, about 130,000 across the campaign. Churchill called it the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. 60 million pounds of fortress, delivered to men on bicycles with no tires. The winning vehicle cost about 2 weeks' wages. Britain's humiliations were not finished that decade. The next one rolled off its own production line, and it was born on the beach at Dunkirk. In the summer of 1940, Britain rescued its army from Dunkirk, but left most of its heavy equipment lying on the sand. Facing invasion with empty arsenals, it was buying American Thompson submachine guns at around $200 apiece. Paid in dollars, it was rapidly running out of. 2 engineers at Enfield, Shepard and Turpin, were told to design something any factory could make. They delivered the Sten, a steel tube, a spring, a bolt, and a trigger. Fewer than 50 parts, most of them simple stampings. About 5 man-hours to build. Total cost, around 2.5 pounds, roughly $10. It was so simple that Lines Brothers, the biggest toy manufacturer in Britain, became one of its largest producers. Soldiers hated it on sight. They called it the plumber's nightmare and the Woolworth gun, and it earned the insults. Grip It by the magazine, and the single feed design jammed. At the single most important moment a Sten was ever asked to fire, the ambush of Reinhard Heydrich in Prague in 1942, the gun jammed at point-blank range, and a thrown grenade had to finish what the Sten could not. Argue in the comments if you like, but here is the verdict anyway. As a weapon of war, the $10 Sten mattered more than the $200 Thompson, because around 4 million of them were made, and cheapness became a weapon in itself. Stens rained from the sky by parachute into occupied Europe, cheap enough to arm anyone, disposable enough to bury in a garden between missions. Polish resistance fighters copied them in secret underground workshops. And in the final months of the war came the greatest insult of all. Germany, the nation of precision engineering, the country that built the Tiger, put a near identical copy of the Sten into production to arm its last-ditch militias. The engineers who sneered at stamped metal junk ended the war photocopying it. And Germany had already paid the same compliment to an even cruder gun on the Eastern Front. The Soviet Union had learned its winter war lesson in fire, and its answer was the Spagan submachine gun, the PPSh-41. The troops called it Papasha, Daddy. It was stamped steel and a slab of wood, and its barrels were made by taking old Mosin rifle barrels and sawing them in half, so that every worn-out rifle became 2 new submachine guns. Furniture factories and automobile plants stamped out around 6 million of them. It fed from a 71-round drum, fired around 900 rounds a minute, and kept working caked in mud and frozen solid. At Stalingrad, in fighting that moved room by room, German soldiers began quietly dropping their own MP-40s and picking up captured PPShs, because in a stairwell, 71 rounds beats 32. Then, the German army made the humiliation official. It issued conversion kits so captured Spagans could fire German 9mm ammunition and handed them back out to its own troops. There is no higher compliment in war than the enemy adopting your weapon. The PPSh was not done with superpowers. In Korea in 1950, Chinese-made copies came screaming out of the night at American lines, firing so fast that US soldiers named it the burp gun and learned to dread the sound. One gun carved from half of another gun, and it humbled the German war machine and rattled the American one within a decade. But every case so far belongs to the industrial age. The final weapon is on battlefields at this very moment, and its math has never been beaten. In 1961, the Soviet Union fielded a reusable steel tube that fires a rocket-propelled grenade, the RPG-7. More than 9 million have been produced since. Training takes an afternoon. In most of the world's conflict zones, the launcher changes hands for a few $100s, and a rocket for around 100. In Vietnam, it punched into American armor and landing zones. In Afghanistan in the 1980s, long before the famous Stinger missiles arrived, it was ambushing Soviet convoys and helicopters in the mountain passes. 2 superpowers had already bled on it. The third act was filmed. October 3rd, 1993. Mogadishu, American Blackhawks hung low over the city, covering a raid that was supposed to take 90 minutes. Somali militiamen, coached by fighters seasoned in the Afghan war, had learned to fire their RPGs in volleys and to aim at one specific spot: the tail rotor. Super 6-1 took a hit and went down into the city. Super 6-4 followed. The 90-minute raid became an 18-hour battle for survival. 18 American soldiers were killed, and the images that came out of Mogadishu were broadcast to the entire planet. Do the math the Pentagon had to do that week. Each Blackhawk cost around $6 million. The rockets that destroyed them cost a few hundred at most. Within days, the White House announced America was leaving Somalia, and by March of 1994, the last soldiers were gone. Many historians argue the shadow of that one night helped keep America paralyzed a year later, during the genocide in Rwanda. A rocket designed when Kennedy was president had shifted the foreign policy of the world's only superpower, at a cost per kill no defense contractor in history has ever matched. So read the final scoreboard. A liquor bottle set fire to a tank army. A bicycle with no tires took the British Empire's greatest fortress. A toy factory gun was copied by the master engineers who mocked it. Half a rifle barrel humbled Germany and rattled America. And a $100 rocket chased a superpower off a continent. The pattern never changes. Expensive weapons are built to impress in peacetime. Cheap weapons are built to work in war. And the lesson still refuses to stick, because right now, hobby-grade drones costing a few $100s are destroying tanks worth millions. And somewhere, a procurement officer is insisting it does not count. The price tag does not fight. It never did. If this verdict was worth your time, hit subscribe, because there are more machines waiting for trial.